Yo, what is going on, everybody? My name is Zerax. I hope that you're having a good day and welcome to the channel. Today in this video, I wanted to go over a glaive build for the hunter class. Glaives are a newly introduced weapon type that I'm sure all of us were very excited to get our hands on, but then learned that they kind of feel bad, especially when it comes to playing higher difficulty missions and running into those hefty yellow bar enemies that could care less about you having a new toy. I promise you though, if you spend some time with your glaive and learn it, you may be surprised just what you can actually do with it. This build is also going to utilize the new Void 3.0, so if you're hoping to see what doors those changes have opened up for us, this is a good place to start. I'm going to divide this into sections focusing on subclass, artifact mods, armor mods, and then of course finish off with some insight on the glaive and how perks on the glaive function. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so first let's focus on our Void subclass. Right out the gate, your Void, super, and your abilities do not matter for this build. Choose whatever super you prefer, and the same goes for your grenade. Choose specifically off your own personal preference. The real juicy stuff is in the fragments and aspects. We'll start with the aspects first. In the first slot, we are going to equip Vanishing Step. This makes it when you dodge, you go invisible, which will play nicely into the whole build. Second will be Stylish Executioner. This makes it where defeating a weakened, suppressed, or volatile target grants invisibility and true sight. The big benefit we're looking for here is the invisibility after a kill. Also, as a side bonus, your next melee attack after going invis from Stylish Executioner will weaken your target. Now, if you couldn't tell where this build is heading yet, we're going for a shadowy assassin type vibe here. I think it's also important to note here real quick that the glaive melee attack benefits from melee mods and abilities, while the shooting aspect from glaive benefits from the weapon mods and abilities. Think of the glaive melee as an extension of your own regular melee. The mods that affect your melee will do the same for the glaive melee. Now let's move on to our fragments. The two aspects we are using have granted us 4 fragment slots to play around with. For our first, we are going to equip the Echo of Leeching. This grants health regeneration for every melee kill. This is probably the most vital piece of this build, as it's crucial to your survivability while using the glaive. Next will be Echo of Domineering. After suppressing a target, you gain increased mobility for a short duration, and your equipped weapon is reloaded from reserves. In the artifact, there is a mod that will allow you to essentially have an infinite uptake of this buff, but we'll go more into that later. Next will be Echo of Exchange. Melee final blows grant grenade energy. Again, the melee of the glaive benefits from melee mods and abilities. With this, you'll be constantly generating extra grenade energy while using the melee of the glaive. Last fragment will be Echo of Reprisal. Final blows when surrounded by combatants grants super energy. Seeing as the intended purpose of this build is to be up in the enemy's face at all times, you will also be constantly generating extra super energy as well. Now let's move on to the artifact and the mods we'll be utilizing from that. The artifact actually has quite a few mods that can be used with glaives, but there's only 3 mods we'll be using from here. First is Psionic Forging. The Enigma Glaive comes with the origin trait Cycle Hack, which allows for when you do continuous damage to a target for their damage output to be lowered for a short duration. Psionic Forging is simply going to extend the duration of that effect, allowing you to withstand a bit more damage and adding more to your survivability. Next is Thermal Shock Plating. This mod simply gives you more resistance to solar and arc damage. The more resistance and armor you have, the more tanky you will be, allowing you to not be instantly obliterated when the enemy starts to focus you. Last will be Suppressing Glaive. This mod right here is the glue that holds everything together and makes this build as powerful as it is. Suppressing Glaive suppresses enemies every time you do damage to them with the glaive. This essentially means you will immobilize enemies, causing them to end up in a somewhat stun phase and they cannot fire their weapons. This is also effective with most yellow bar enemies and makes them more approachable. Now there's a couple of things that synergize perfectly with this from our Void subclass. First is the aspect stylish Executioner. We gain invisibility for every suppressed enemy we kill, making it where we go invis for every single enemy kill with the Glaive, allowing for us to gracefully slip right back into the shadows after every kill. Also, our fragment, Echo of Domineering, gives us increased mobility for every enemy we suppress. Since we'll be suppressing every enemy we attack with the Glaive now, we essentially have a constant uptake from this buff, giving us increased mobility. Now let's look at our armor and go through the mods we plan to slot there. First, the exotic armor I'm going to recommend for this build is the 6 Coyote, which grants you a second dodge charge. This isn't absolutely necessary, but I'll go more into detail later why I chose to run this. Next, we want to make sure all of our armor is masterworked and is using Void Affinity, except for our boots. On our boots, we'll be running an Arc Affinity. Now, having all your armor masterworked isn't a necessity, but if you want to run all the exact mods I slot into these pieces, it will help. I also utilize a few Void Elemental Well mods here. If you don't have them, do not worry. This doesn't break the build. They are simply here to add more utility to your dodge. If you do not have the Well mods, disregard the need for fully masterwork armor and the need for the 6 Coyote. For our head, we are going to slot in Psionic Forging, Dynamo, and Well of Tenacity. Don't worry about the general armor mods I use on these pieces. This is going to differ from person to person depending on the stats of your armor. But for reference, my armor and mods are focused on having more mobility and recovery. We plan to utilize our dodge very often in this build, and more mobility means the faster we get it back. Dynamo will equal reduced super cooldown when using class ability near targets. Not necessary, but aids in getting your super faster. Well of Tenacity equals Void Elemental Wells, granting reduced damage taken from enemies for a short duration. We'll go into how we go about acquiring those wells later. Arms will be 2 Focusing Strike mods in Reaping Wellmaker. Focusing Strike grants class ability for doing damage with a melee attack. These do appear to go on some sort of cooldown after activating, so don't expect to proc for every melee attack, but it will aid in getting that dodge energy back. Reaping Wellmaker is how we will be actually spawning our Void Wells and why we want to generate extra energy for our dodge in every way possible. This is also why we choose to run 6 Coyote. When we dodge, our next final blow will spawn a Void Well. Wells in general provide energy to your ability with the lowest current energy, but since we are using a Void class and we are spawning a Void Well, we gain energy for all of our abilities. Thanks to also having Well of Tenacity on our head armor, we also gain reduced damage taken from that well as well. For chest, we want to run 2 Thermoshock plating mods and Well of Utility. Again, Thermoshock reduces the damage we receive from solar and arc damage. I chose to double down, but you could always slot in a Void Resistance mod to also have some protection from void damage, or even run melee or sniper damage resistance or concussive dampener. Well of Utility gives us extra class ability energy when we pick up a Void Well. Again, we're aiming for trying to have a dodge on us at all times to repeat the cycle of buffs we receive from Void Wells. For legs, the whole reason we choose to run Arc Affinity is simply because of the mod Powerful Friends that has a secondary perk that grants us 20 mobility as long as we have another Arc mod slotted into the same armor. This is once again just a means to getting 100 mobility so we can regain our dodge ability back as fast as possible. Don't feel like this is necessary. Matter of fact, run whatever you want here if you don't need the extra mobility. I forgot to mention there is one extra mod I'm running from the artifact, and that's Glaive Scavenger, but this build is more focused on using the Glaive specifically as a melee weapon most of the time, so don't look at Scav as a necessity unless you plan on doing a ton of shooting as well. Last is our Cloak. Here we slot in Suppressing Glaive, Perpetuation, and another Well of Utility. Perpetuation gives us class ability energy for using our class ability, and Well of Utility of course provides class ability energy for picking up Void Wells. We run 2 of these Well mods throughout our armor because the effects stack. Now to finish off, I just want to go over the Glaive a little and give some insight on perks. The thing about the Glaive is to understand that there are 3 different ways that it functions, and in those 3 different ways is 3 different ways we can buff it. As said earlier, the melee function of the weapon works almost as an extension of your own regular melee, while the shooting aspect functions more as the actual weapon. The shield function only benefits from perks where stated as well as in the weapon's stats. With that, understand that most of the perks you can craft onto this weapon will benefit the shooting function of this weapon only. I think the perk most people are going to look at and say, oh, that's the one, is Rampage. Kills with this weapon grant increased damage. You melee attack with the Glaive, that is a weapon, so you should have gained increased damage, right? Nope, melee kills don't activate Rampage with the Glaive, and shooting then meleeing with the Glaive does not provide a bonus to that damage either. Seems crazy, right? This may have seemed like an odd choice, but I think Bungie wanted to provide multiple ways you can affect the Glaive. As a matter of fact, because the melee of the Glaive functions separately from the weapon, this is allowed for this build to even exist. With that, I hope you enjoy this build, and maybe recommend this to others who have already given up on the Glaive, as it does function much differently from any other weapon we have. Maybe we can inspire more people to use it. If you would like to see a Glaive build for the Titan and the Warlock as well, let me know down in the description, and subscribe. With that, I hope you all have a good day. Peace.